Good evening, one and all. Gordon Cosby here with guess who? Candy the Wonder Pup, who almost spilled my coffee. I guess I should be ready for her when I know she's going to jump on me. If you're new to this channel, if you've been attracted by my depiction of Toronto Sun, the local newspaper for the city of Toronto, uh, and you've never seen this channel before, Candy starts it off every time with me giving her a treat. So sit, shake a paw, lay down, speak, speak, speak. All right, close enough. There you go, girl. Candy's looked after. Now she'll leave me alone. Danny Coleman is already here. You're late. You're late for a very important date. Yes, I'm 3 minutes late. I scheduled this to start at 10:45, and it's now 10:48. So I started at probably 10:46, 10:47. Close enough for rock and roll. It's better than I usually do. Usually I'm at least 4 or 5 minutes late. Sometimes I get off on time. And Danny further writes that he's ready for the mystical, magical, great dark carnival. Welcome to the news. And I wanted to talk about this. Just there's not much happening in the world in terms of no breaking news. The situation in Israel continues unfolding. You know, there's always some new news coming out. I've seen that Israel has now bombed, or I guess that would be the term, bombed a weapons depot in Syria attached to the Russians. Everything, I've been saying from the beginning that this is going to escalate and this is going to turn into a major conflict, but it's happening very slow in incremental stages. And the other day, Thursday, I went into work and I did something that I haven't done for a very long time. It's been years since I picked up a daily newspaper. I was into work early and I figured I'd sit down, have a coffee, and read an actual physical hard copy of an actual newspaper. And this is something, it kind of took me back down memory lane, as it were. It was starting all the way back when I was in high school that I got into the habit. I would go into school with a copy of the newspaper. I've got a number of people here now. Danny's here, Anna Monarchy's here. There's a lot of people watching. The live chat is on. Let me switch it from top chat, where the algorithms, I guess, pick out what they consider the top messages, and switch it to live chat so that everything that gets written, I can see it. I'll decide for myself what's important and what's not. But at any rate, so starting all the way back in grade 9, which would have been 1980, 1981, I was reading the daily paper. I started out always reading the Toronto Star. And the Toronto Star is what they call a broadsheet format, where you have to, it's folded and you take it out, broadsheet format. And back then the paper cost around 25 cents, a quarter. If you got it from a box, you would drop a quarter in the box, lift up, grab your newspaper out, let it down. And talk about the days of trust. There'd be 10, 15, 20 newspapers in the box. You put your quarter in and you could grab all 20, 25, but who needs 25 copies of the paper? You take one. And that was enough, because they had so much advertising revenue that was the business model. The consumers of the news would pay a very nominal fee, a dime, a quarter, get the newspaper. It would be thick, and there would be different sections. There'd be the editorials, there'd be the entertainment, there'd be the sports, there'd be world events, and you would read through the newspaper. And the two primary forms of the newspaper were broadsheet format, and I wish I had an example of a broadsheet format, and this was called a tabloid. And the tabloids were always regarded as being lower end journalism. Like the National Enquirer was a tabloid, and newspapers of that ilk at the supermarket checkout, with the Star, the National Enquirer, the Globe. These were the tabloid format, sensationalistic, lower end journalism. That was the general perception. The broadsheet newspapers in Canada, that would be the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, were broadsheets, and the Toronto Sun was our tabloid. And back in the day, back when I was in high school, page 3 would have a pinup girl. Interestingly enough, the Toronto Sun still has enough pictures of her. Sunshine Girl Stephanie loves Tai Chi, meditation, and yoga. 5'6", brown-eyed beauty, posed for us in September 2017. So they're going back 7 years. And what's amazing is that it's no longer a quarter, it's no longer a dime. Can't believe I paid for it too. $3 for this thin little newspaper. There are only 28 pages, and actually each page has 4 on it. So the middle page is page, doesn't have, well, they divide it into sections, but there are actually only I'm guessing 14 pieces of newspaper here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Only 10 actual pieces of newspaper. Each one represents 4 pages of the tabloid. 28 pages in all. And the back page always had, even back then it was advertising, new sex pill grows in popularity with recent approval in Canada. One of these things where they try and make it look like a news story, but it's actually advertising, and it says right on the top, not in bold print, but in big enough print, and you see it's a paid advertisement. And tabloids are always known for being sensationalistic, and here they've superimposed the pictures of Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins, who are the general manager and the president of the Toronto Blue Jays. And they're talking about how wieners and losers is the headline. They hit a home run with loony hot dogs, $1 hot dogs this year, but that's it. Jays brass grilled about the pathetic season, but come up with the same stale answers. And this was the one thing that actually got me into reading The Sun, was the fact that their sports coverage was better than the Toronto Star. They had a later deadline, so if the Jays had a late night game on the coast, the Sun might actually have the full coverage. Toronto Star had an earlier deadline, and quite often it wouldn't be covered. But I would read the paper. I wouldn't read the entertainment section too much unless I was really interested in a particular individual, but just wanted to go through it for fun. And to see what do newspapers report on nowadays. It's been so long since I picked one up. So the first story on page 2 is, here's the big news: slice of success. Popular Toronto pizza joint chef among the world's best. So Ryan Badley won some type of competition and is one of the a Toronto pizzeria chef, has been ranked among the best of the best. When the Best Chef Awards were honoring Best Pizza Chef, Ryan Badley of Pizzeria Badali came in at number 32. So the 32nd best pizza chef, I guess, in the world or in Canada. Yeah, it's in the world. He was the only Canadian in the top 100. And then the next article underneath is on the food theme again. It says, is the food in the fridge still good? Talking about the fact that in California, they're bringing in new legislation that will include best consumed before or highest nutritional value if you consume this food before this date, and then a different date for expiry when the food should be thrown away. Because as it currently stands, you'll see on your grocery, when you go grocery shopping, it typically says best before, meaning that's when you get the highest nutritional value and everything. But it can still be eaten after that date. But a lot of people will see that best before date and assume that it means any day after that it's gone bad, and they'll throw it out, and it leads to a lot of food wastage. Anyway, I'm going to read up on what's being said because it's getting filled up. Danny writes, I too no longer read the paper, but started in 1987 reading the Edmonton Journal in school. I didn't know you were from Edmonton, from one separatist country to another, from Alberta to Quebec. And talking about the Sunshine Girl, yeah, page 3 now, back page. Cryptomeria, right, who now has a subtitled name, Darth Pixie. Very good. I used to love the National Enquirer. It was always good for a laugh. One time in my early 20s, I delivered fast food for a restaurant, and the owner of the restaurant would have the Star, the Globe, the National Enquirer laid about, because short little articles, easy to read, written at a very simple level, probably grade 2, 3 level English. And so he would have that around for people while they were waiting, and they were quite popular. Anne Monarchy writes, I wish they made newspapers like magazines that didn't have parts of the articles all over the place rather than having full ones one at a time. That's one thing with broadsheet newspapers. They would cram the front page with stories, and it would say continued on A2, continued on A3, continued on A7. So you could read a portion of it. Then you'd have to go diving deeper into the paper to read the remainder. Typically with tabloids, you got the full story. There's no continued on page whatever. So is the food still good? Then it talks about a police shooting in Midtown Toronto. A shootout between police and a car thief in the heart of the city sent an officer to surgery and his assailant on the run. Toronto said the police officer was shot Wednesday near Yonge Street and Eglinton Avenue, Yonge and Egg, and rushed to Sunnybrook. Another story about three kids and a woman, hit by a car. 3 children, including a newborn, were hospitalized with serious but non-life-threatening injuries, while an adult was rushed to hospital after a vehicle struck several bystanders in Etobicoke early Wednesday evening. So, and then another story about a crime scene protester arrested. A 29-year-old man accused of obstructing a police officer last month was arrested. And then when we get on to page 4, we have the reporting on what's happening in Israel. Israel presses forward on 2 fronts, lashes out at UN leadership. It's another article down here about I think it's a student, Mohammed Shahzeb Khan is the 20-year-old Pakistani man on a Canadian student visa who U.S. officials allege planned to head to New York City to slaughter Jews. Now the feds have growing concerns that the tidal wave of immigration unleashed by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government could turn into a bloodbath in the United States. That's that article. This guy, Joe Warmington, he came to prominence just as the Toronto newspapers were starting to struggle because of the internet. Why would I pay even a quarter for news that is already old when I can look at my phone or look at a computer and get news that's minutes, hours old? When I picked this up Thursday morning, I picked it up at around 8 o'clock in the morning. The deadline, these articles probably had to be submitted by 9 or 10 o'clock the previous 9 or 10 p.m. the previous night. And so the news is already more than 12 hours old by the time I get this physical hard paper in my hand. This is Joe Warmington is praising Pierre Poilievre's very forthright, non-wishy-washy support of Israel, whereas Trudeau tries to talk out of both sides of his mouth. Trudeau tries to sound very supportive of Israel when he's talking to Jewish groups, but then We have a large number of Muslims in the country, and when he's speaking to groups that have an Islamic world view, he speaks another way. Poilievre is consistent. Undercover agent set for court testimony was another article. I didn't read that one. 8 witnesses are expected to testify at the preliminary inquiry of a man charged with firing shots at a Jewish school next year. So it's on the same theme. And what we have, sad situation. Neighbors mourn Curtis murder victims. Curtis is an area just east of Oshawa. Little Devil jailed for 50 years. On the streets, they called violent MS-13 gang member Lenise Escobar Little Devil. But in the Long Island courtroom, they called the sinister young woman a murderer. So it's news out of New York City. Another one, crime scene story, page 6. Crime scene, woman's body found in Junction. The homicide unit is investigating the death of a woman in her 60s found in a Junction home Tuesday afternoon. Toronto police said officers were called shortly after 2 p.m. If it bleeds, it leads. If death and destruction and everything gets gets right at the front. Why should cops have to step up patrols for October 7th? Nothing to celebrate. We're coming up to the 1-year anniversary of when Hamas launched its terror attack on the nation state of Israel. And there's some concern that for some members of Canadian society, they applauded. They were thrilled when 1,200 Jews were murdered, when babies and infants were kidnapped and taken back into terror tunnels. Some people were happy with that. Not me, but and then hard time sought for horrific abuse. And I paid $3 for this. And it occurred to me, I thought, without going too much into it, in the middle of the paper around page 12, you'd have the editorial section. This would be opinion, calling for an election. Here's the deal, let's have an election. Trudeau is so hated in this country. Let's have a darn election and get it over with and get rid of him. Trudeau should listen to Canucks and trim bureaucracy. Good luck with that. Trudeau likes to grow government. How we cope shows that men and women are very different. Guest opinion. And then you had that's the one thing I always like the Sun for. They had a pretty good sports section. And another thing I found curious about the Sun is that even though the Toronto Star was written at a higher grade level, the Toronto Sun had a harder crossword, and they still have it. The New York Times crossword. Can you see that? Yeah, New York Times. The Toronto Star crossword, by contrast, was super easy. Super easy. I could do it in 15 minutes to half an hour. The New York Times crossword is always much harder. I found that odd because it was generally regarded that the Toronto Sun was written at about a grade 4 or 5 level, that the Toronto Star was written at a grade 7, 8 level, and that the Globe and Mail was written at a high school graduate first year of university level. But so you would think the Toronto Star would have a harder crossword, but actually the Sun did, and they still do. I did it, and I got most of it. I didn't know 44 across, some vodka orders, couldn't get that one. And there were some cryptic clues that I couldn't get. But I did okay. Pretty much finished it. Unfortunately, if I want to get the answers, I have to buy Fridays. I have to spend another $3, and I didn't buy another one. I'm going to catch up on what's being said. I got a couple more things I wanted to say about the news. Anna Monarchy writes, I like some of the comics since I was a kid. I used to be excited for all the new Peanuts skits and remember when I read the last one published before the creator Charles Schultz died. I was surprised to see there's still a pretty decent comic page. It's actually, there's the comics in color. which wasn't always the case, and then a few more on this side. And there was even some that I still recognize. Garfield, I recognize. Baby Blues, I recognized. Not many. Sherman's Lagoon, Mother Goose and Grimm, I recognize those two. But the rest were pretty much, the rest of them are pretty much brand new to me. Although there's one down here that kind of looks like The Far Side in content, which I always enjoyed The Far Side too. And I used to love the comics, even as an adult. Anyway, let's see. And Cryptomeria mentions the Far Side as well. That was always good. Danny Copeman talking about when does food go bad. He says that the yogurt is still good 2 weeks after best before date. And saying, and Anna Monarchy says, even if you don't refrigerate it sometimes. John 5 writes, good old paper. Mr. Causey must have lived in the time when you can pay a boy less than $1 to get a paper in the streets, right? Oh, that would be downtown Toronto. They would have, I was remarking on it the other day. I saw someone shopping with gloves with the fingers cut out. And I said, boy, those are the types of gloves that the guys who sold newspapers on the street corner used to have, with their fingers and thumbs. And then I have Danny Copeman writing, I used to deliver 350 papers Monday to Friday, 500 on Saturday and Sunday before 6:30, before 6:30 in the morning, every day, age 12 to 16. Made 200 per month plus tips. I delivered newspapers as well for a short time. I delivered the Oregonian in Portland, Oregon. I think that was it, or the Portland Journal, but I think it was the Oregonian. That was one of their broadsheet newspapers. And Monarchy writes, some enterprising scoundrel who probably swiped the whole stack, talking about what I talked about earlier with the thing. The thing is, if you got your picture in the newspaper, then maybe you would want a bunch of copies. When I was 17 or 18, I helped rescue a kid who had fallen into Lake Ontario. And I got my picture in the Toronto Star, and I don't have a copy of it anymore. My mom did, but I didn't worry about it too much. It was actually 4 of us who had rescued the kid out, and then I was the one who ended up getting my picture in the paper. Woohoo. Anna Monarchy writes, National Graphics seems to be getting dumbed down more and more, has been sold out to the New World Order for a while. Their 2015, I think, May War on Science article is aptly named because that is what it is. Haven't looked at the National Geographic in years. My dad used to have a subscription to that publication. And according Anna Monarchy is saying that according to the National Geographic, not the National Enquirer, that they say fluoride, vaccines, flu shots are all harmless and that chemtrails don't exist. And that they advertised for Monsanto in the 1970s. Monsanto, famous GMO, genetically modified organism company. Gonna go for a few minutes. Okay, gonna take a break. But the thing that occurred to me is just hearkening back to the old Godfather movie, the very first one, when Michael is sitting down with Tom Hagen, with Sonny, with Clemenza and Tessio, the whole gang is sitting around, and they're trying to decide how to deal with the problem of Sollozzo, and how Sollozzo wants to have a meeting, and Sollozzo is under the guard of a New York City police captain by the name of McCluskey. And Tom Hagen, the consigliere, role played by Robert Duvall, is saying, Sonny, you have to understand that while Sollozzo is being guarded in this faction, that he is untouchable. No family has ever taken out a New York City police captain, the five families would all come out against you, Sonny. Even the old man's political protection would run for cover. And he's trying to urge Sonny to calm down. But that's when Michael says, look, they want to set a meeting. They want to set a meeting with me. Let's set the meeting in a public place so I'll be safe. And if get our informers to find out where the meeting is taking place, insist it's a public place like a restaurant so I'll feel safe. And if Clemenza and his regime can manage to get a gun there, I'll shoot them both. And they all laugh and they say, oh, you're taking it personal. This is business. And Michael, Al Pacino says, you know, he says, but wait, we're talking about a dirty cop, a cop who got mixed up in the rackets, a cop who got mixed up in drugs, who got what was coming to him. And then he says, turns to Tom Hagen, the conciliary, and says, that's a good story. We have newspaper men on the payroll, don't we? They might like a story like that. And Tom Hagen agrees. And this was the manner in which criminal organizations could influence public opinion, because journalists, someone writing for the Toronto Star, Toronto Sun, New York Times, Oregonian, whatever the local newspaper, and some would have syndicated columns that would run across an entire nation. It's a good way for them to augment their opinion. They have a platform to influence public opinion and to use words to try and sway people to see things from a certain point of view. And so criminal organizations, mafia, Costa Nostra, they could influence public opinion by paying journalists, newspaper men, and it was always men back then, to frame things in a way to influence public opinion. And the world has not changed one iota from that time. And it's not just criminal organizations that can influence public opinion. As a matter of fact, like when it comes to corporate interests, some would define corporate interests as being criminal, and how they are able to influence public opinion by controlling the media. Now we look at the media today, and you have ABC, NBC, Fox, and you have these hedge funds like BlackRock and others that basically control the world's media. And people think we're under the misguided apprehension. We think we're being informed, but instead we're being herded in one direction or another. And it can be on any number of issues. And, you know, the war in Israel is just one. COVID was another. How we feel about climate change. Do you believe that man-made anthropogenic climate change is the most existential crisis facing the world? Many people do believe that because they read the newspaper or the online digital version of the newspaper, or they watch the nightly news, and so they've been fooled into believing that they're informed. And all that's simply happening is that their opinion is being influenced by powerful money interests, the same way that the Corleone family in the fictional account of The Godfather was able to influence public opinion about the assassination murder of this Captain McCluskey. Going to catch up. Let's see. Shrunian writes, Trudeau makes living standard in Canada insufferable. 63% of Canadians do not own homes. That sucks. Yes, it does. And the ultimate goal eventually, you remember the WEF's old line. You got to remember the World Economic Forum. This is the corporate world. The corporate world is what finances the World Economic Forum. And basically, to my way of thinking, the way I define the WEF is it is a three-headed beast. And the primary head of this three-headed monster is the corporate world. They finance everything. Then you have government and academia. Those are the three heads. There's the corporate world, the ivory towers, academic world, and then you have government. And money greases everything. If Trudeau decides to resign his position as prime minister, he'll sail off into the sunset with his WEF money. The same way that Jacinda, whatever her name was, down in New Zealand, when she left politics in that country, sailed off into the sunset. Trudeau can do the same. And they also finance the academic institutions. They provide grants to get the science that they are paying for. People always, and a lot of people have said, when you want to follow the science, all you have to do, if you want to follow the science, is follow the money. Going to keep reading. Whale Oil Beef is writing, you recall Life magazine, of course, an old untruth, truth teller, insider gospel on many subjects. Yeah. I mean, these were the things people thought that because they were taking the effort to read and be informed, they thought they were informed. What's amazing is whether it was a quarter or whether you're paying for a magazine subscription, the New Yorker, even Playboy had its, Rolling Stone magazine. These type of, it was just a manner in which to influence public opinion, and you never knew who was behind it. You never knew who was behind the scenes telling, and you can frame things so many different ways. From one perspective, a group can be called freedom fighters, and from another perspective, they can be called terrorists. And depending on what you're reading and what angle and what perspective is being pushed, you can be led in one direction or the other. And it's difficult to understand things when take a situation like Israel, as complex as that is. And that's why I've taken such a deep dive into the history of the region to try and understand and get to the core elements of what is the basis for this conflict. And in trying to determine, is there a potential solution? And honestly, in that case, there is no solution. The only solution is war. And the only solution is total victory for one side and total defeat for the other. I'm going to read. Danny is writing, 75% of Canadians want Justin gone, yet he doesn't seem to get it. No, he's not getting the memo. And now there's word out that they're going to increase, or the Bloc Québécois is calling on the government of Canada to increase the level of OAS and CPP payments to seniors. They've just recently announced a 10% bump to OAS CPP payments to seniors aged 75 and older. But those under 75 don't get the increase, kind of creating two classes of seniors, those over 75 and those under 75. And there's commentary out there right now, even in this publication, talking about the fact that Canada really can't afford it because Trudeau has bankrupted us, and it just means borrowing and printing more money. But I think Trudeau may go for it because it would be a vote winner. And then that makes life difficult for Pierre Poilievre, because does he maintain his fiscal conservative outlook, or does he cave to win some votes? Politics is such a mess. And Danny Copeman's talking about weather modification technology. That's been admitted to in the mainstream, that cloud seeding is a real thing, and weather modification. And it should be noted, there's an international treaty signed at the United Nations by Canada and numerous other nations stating that they will not use weather modification technology in warfare. So does weather modification technology exist? Well, why would you have a treaty that prevents you from using something that doesn't exist? Obviously, to my mind, if there's a treaty precluding the use of something, well, that something must exist. So weather modification technology does exist, in my view. We already know about cloud seeding. Amonarchy writes, the old man of the sea drank a cup of whale oil for breakfast. Hemingway trivia. I never read that book of Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man of the Sea. The only one I read was The Sun Also Rises. Anyway, Danny Coleman writes that Playboy had really well-written articles. They did. They paid some top-notch. It was to give it a veneer, not just a veneer, but it was to give it, make it socially acceptable, because it was a pinup magazine. It was naked women inside, but then it would, it gave it some cachet, and you're not just a pervert. You're reading Gore Vidal. You're reading, John Kenneth Galbraith. You're reading really good articles by really good, solid authors. Hey, you're an intellectual, while also looking at some scantily clad or naked women. I read the book on a book called Playboy, which chronicled how Playboy came into existence, kind of Hugh Hefner's life story. I read it so many years ago, I don't remember much of it, aside from the fact that it was Hugh Hefner acquiring the rights to pictures of Marilyn Monroe that really vaulted the magazine. And the empire that ensued from that, Playboy clubs in most major cities, the Playboy bunnies and everything. And Whale Oil Beef is quoting Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, the famous quote, if you don't read the newspaper, you are uninformed. If you read the newspaper, then you are misinformed. And then Denzel Washington, within the last 10, 15 years, brought that quote back into the limelight. I think he was on the red carpet at the Oscars and said the same thing. And then expanded on it to the extent to talk about the problem in journalism today, how the goal is to be first, not to be right, just to be first, because it's such a hyper-competitive environment that the newspapers and the media outlets all are trying to be sensationalistic and to be first, even if they don't fact check, they don't check to see if what they're printing, if what they're putting out there is right. I talked about that during in the COVID era with young Nathaniel Spitzer, this 14-year-old kid who passed away. He died of a brain cancer. He had terminal stage 4 inoperable brain cancer, was in palliative care, and the Alberta Health Services and Dina Hinshaw came out and told the world that he died of COVID. And the media outlets didn't even check on it. They didn't dig into it. They didn't engage in any investigation. They just ran with the story that the lie that Dina Hinshaw gave them, and ran it, prominently. Youngest COVID victim ever. And it was only because that young child, that tragic kid, had two courageous sisters who brought forth the fact that their brother did not die of COVID, that he had stage 4 terminal brain cancer, that his death was already fully expected because of brain cancer, nothing to do with COVID. And they ran it up a high flagpole. And they forced Dina Hinshaw and the media outlets to admit that they had lied to Canadians. And this is where things get dangerous, when you have, what I'm going to say, criminal elements controlling the flow of information in Canada and elsewhere in the Western world. You can't be sure of anything out there anymore, and you can't be sure of it. And that's why so many people have turned to social media. They think, okay, I can't trust the Toronto Sun or the Star or the Globe and Mail, National Post. I can't trust the news media, so I'm going to trust some guy on YouTube. Well, some guy on YouTube, I likewise could be paid. I could be paid. I could be in the employ of the Israeli government. I could be. I'll tell you right now, I'm not. But you can be suspicious. Being suspicious in today's world is good. Although I would say this, if I was taking money from some organization or some group trying to, use my platform to influence public opinion, I'd have more than 1,000 subscribers. I'd have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions. I would have better production value. I'd have a robust interconnection that never lagged, never skipped, never did anything like that. And I would have sponsors. I would be telling you, but just a second. Well, I want to thank the sponsor of a Canadian take on news events. Make sure to invest in gold. And the way to invest in gold is through this company or that company. And I don't begrudge those individuals who do it, who do take on sponsorship. It tells me, why are they doing it? They're doing it for money. Now, maybe that's just to defray expenses, to give themselves a nice, robust internet connection, like a T1 line or something. Maybe it's just that. But you've got to be incredibly circumspect in today's world. Danny Coleman writes, same thing happened to me. Witnessed something, and Danny and Anna Monarchy have both witnessed things firsthand and then seen the reporting on it, and the reporting did not line up with that which they saw. And that happens all over the place. Whale Oil Beef writes, I understand that GE used cloud seeding in the 40s to cause rain behind the dams. The government took the technology away. Very possible. Danny Coleman says that he has a buddy. I'm going to leave that be just because. Rest in peace, John Amos. Oh, Danny Coleman, don't even go there. He writes the Gordon Causey Show, brought to you by Pfizer. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Certainly, never the pharmaceutical companies. It was just amazing looking at an old newspaper. Now that I'm on the comics, it has my crossword, which I haven't read in ages. Let's see what it says. Leo. This was for Thursday. Physical activity will help you turn angst and frustration into self-awareness and achievement. Use your intelligence to sort through information and find experts who offer insight into what is possible. And it's a 4-star day for me, whatever that means. Although I see 3 stars, 5 stars, 2 stars, so 4 isn't bad. Who knows? Thursday was a day like any other for me. What's going to happen? I still think we're heading toward where we'll see what happens with the war in Israel. We'll see what happens on the health front. I do think the health front is going to blow up. I just happen to think that there are a number of people who, for whatever reason, quote unquote, have lowered immune systems right now. For whatever reason. I won't speculate. That why there's maybe 70, 80, 90% of the population whose immune systems have been seemingly primed and made weakened when it comes to combating all kinds of things like viral pathogens like RSVs, influenzas, COVIDs, Marburg virus, monkeypox, goodness knows. But I do think something's coming on that front. And then you have the war that's taking place in Israel, and I do expect that to expand outward. I think I was reading in here articles, from an old-fashioned newspaper talking about what was it, acts of domestic terrorism that taking place within Canada. 8 witnesses expected to testify at the preliminary inquiry of a man charged with firing shots at a Jewish school last year. I think that kind of thing. I think we're going to see that expand. Then I expect the climate change. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but I think there's going to be so much coming at us all at once that we're going to see Trudeau or even Poilievre, whoever the Prime Minister of Canada is at the time, ceding Canadian control and authority and autonomy over to some world government body to steer us through these challenging global times. And then Katie barred the door. Then we're getting into biblical times. And speaking of biblical times, I have Danny sharing his favorite message, the one he puts up every time. Jesus is king, and he is getting to relationship. Danny writes that Trudeau sold us out, and he did. Canada has been sold out. So has much of the Western world. And Whale Oil Beef is writing, in 2020, beginning autopsies were not permitted, if any, on the list of symptoms existed. Yeah. I mean, that was, to my mind, that was both an element of COVID, I think, was a test to see how the population would react, and that they didn't go as far as now that they know how we're going to react, they're all the better prepared for next time. This is something of a war. When I look at the situation unfolding between Iran and Israel, Iran just threw, I think it's 180 or so ballistic missiles at Israel. Now, was that the full? Did they empty their arsenal? Did they throw everything they had at Israel? I do not believe so. I think part of their part of the objective in throwing that 180 or so ballistic missiles at Israel, part of the reason was to want to inflict some damage, to damage Israeli military infrastructure, to frighten the population. But an equally important part of it, I think, as well, was to gauge Israeli reaction. How do they react to this 180? What are their defense systems capable of? What holes exist in their Iron Dome and David Sling systems? And it's similar to in boxing, and you jab, and you jab. And part of the reason for the jab is to harass your opponent, keep them off balance, to have them on the defense. But the other thing is to test their reaction. How do they react when I jab down to the midsection? How do they react when I jab up to up around their chin? How do they react? So then if I can gauge their reaction, and if I know they just tilt their head, jab to the head, and they just tilt to one side or the other, well, then I can maybe get a right cross in, left jab, get their head tilting to the side, and then come with a right cross in the way that they move their head. All kinds of different things going on. Sharunian Allegiance is writing, the House of Commons is a joke in Canada compared to the House of Reps in the United States. At the end of the day, to what degree are Canadian politicians bought and paid for? To what degree are American politicians bought and paid for? I think similar in scope. If anything, they're more bought and paid for in the United States than in Canada, because in the United States, bigger economy, there's more at stake. There's more money on the line in the United States than there is in Canada. Their economy is about 10 times as big as ours. Amonarchy writes that the House of Commons is like an unruly kindergarten class, same as in most political debates where there are a lot of people, it seems. It all turns into a bunch of juvenile no's, like a cacophony of childish behavior. The difference is, in the United States, the House of Representatives, what is often referred to as the Congress, the House of Reps. It's like 450, 460 odd members, but people don't, the congressmen or House of Representatives, they don't vote as a block. They do not vote. They'll have the Democratic House leader. There will be the Republican House leader, but they don't have the same party discipline that we have in Canada. There will be Democrats who will vote with the Republicans and Republicans who will vote with the Democrats, depending on the issues, because the U.S. is a very regionally divided country. And a Republican in South Carolina might find common ground with Democrats on a piece of legislation, and he'll break party lines and vote, and he doesn't get kicked out of the party for it. Whereas in Canada, what happens is the NDP votes as a bloc, the Liberals vote as a bloc, the Conservatives, the Bloc Québécois, all these parties vote as a bloc, and if you don't go along, if you're a liberal and you vote against legislation put forward by Justin Trudeau's Liberal government, when the next election comes up, Justin Trudeau can say, well, I'm not going to sign your nomination papers, and you're not going to be the Liberal candidate in the upcoming election. We'll pick someone else. So party discipline is huge. Whale Beef writes about lobbying is where the money is, and it's legal. Oh, yeah. Lobbying is huge. What's amazing is the amount of money that is spent in the United States. The biggest lobbying, I believe, is done by the arms industry, the military industrial complex, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, the arms manufacturers. In Canada, it's the dairy farmers. The dairy farmers are one of, or the biggest lobby in Canada. And that's why we still have, in this country, we still have dairy marketing boards. And it's like basically they have a cartel, and they have an iron-fisted control over milk and dairy product production in this country. And it goes on because it's not particularly sexy. It's just milk, so people don't worry about it. It's not like it's F-35 fighter jets. In Canada, the biggest lobbying is over milk. Just weird. Anna Maraki writes, rather than people being allowed to take turns to communicate, it is a disgrace. Danny Coleman writes, over half of the Trudeau cabinet is owned by the WEF. And that's something Klaus Schwab bragged about, the fact that the WEF has been able to penetrate cabinet tables around the world, in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, in Argentina, all over. And Shurian's writing that he knows about someone at a local gym that he goes to that claims to have fought Justin Trudeau years ago in boxing. That whole Patrick Brazeau, when Trudeau was running for the leadership of the Liberal Party, I'm convinced that was a staged event. I don't think Justin Trudeau beat Patrick Brazeau. Maybe he could have, maybe he couldn't have. I think Brazeau was basically paid to take a dive and to vault Trudeau, to raise his public profile and to make people think that he could be the leader of the Liberal Party. He never should have been made Liberal leader, not based on anything he ever accomplished or did. It was just based on his last name. And initially there was some, well, does this guy, is he ready for the rough and tumble of federal politics? He's only been a backbench MP for a couple terms, a couple parliamentary sessions, and then he had that boxing match against Brazeau, and that, you want to be at the top of the news cycle. And that got him at the top of the news cycle right at a time when he was running for the leadership against a bunch of nobodies, really. Marc Garneau, I think, was running, and that was the only other prominent name. And anyway, we'll see what happens. I'm going to wrap up. Danny Coleman, Justin couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag with two open ends. I would like to take him on. I'm 58. I think he's 53, 54. He's, 3 or 4 years younger than me. I'd take him on. It never happened. I mean, it's an easy challenge for me to throw out there because it's never going to happen, but I would welcome it. Not that it matters, but Justin, if you're listening, and I won't accept a payout. I don't have a cocaine addiction or anything else like Brazeau. So I'm not, if you want to go, If you want to throw down, I'd prefer MMA style, but whatever. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Gone on for nearly an hour, kind of all over the place. But again, there's not any one specific issue that's really grabbing the attention right now. Still waiting for the other shoe to drop in Israel and Iran. That's the big one. How is Israel going to respond to that 180 or whatever number it was ballistic missile attack? How are they going to respond? Are they going to try to take out Iran's nuclear facilities? Are they going to affect their oil production? What are they going to do? They're going to do something. And that, I think, is a slam dunk. It's just a question of what. Are they going to go after Khamenei, the Ayatollah Khamenei, or however that, the supreme religious leader of Iran, however you pronounce his name? Are they going to try and take him out? Or I think it's most likely going to be oil. I think they're going to impact Iran's oil facilities in some fashion. They're going to take out their refineries or something. And I think I came across a story that said that Iran is responsible for only 2% of the world's oil production. So it's not a major part, but you take any amount offline and it's going to affect prices. So fill up. Whale Oil Beef writes that regarding lobbying, that pharma probably outpays dairy. I don't know. I don't think so in Canada. Canada, we tend to follow lockstep with whatever the FDA in the United States says. The Health Canada just says, yes, sir, 3 bags full, and just follows lockstep and does whatever happens down in the United States. Sharunya writes about the heckler, the famous heckler who was calling Jagmeet Singh a sack of whatever and being to sell out, and then Jagmeet Singh turned around and confronted him directly, and the guy tried to claim it wasn't him who was saying it. I didn't follow too closely with that. Didn't really worry about it. A lot of people saw that video. There was one in Belleville, just half an hour or so from where I live, where Trudeau was there, and someone called him a puke, P-U-K-E, and the news tried to make it sound like they tried to present it as someone calling Trudeau a Jew. It's like puke. Listen, but in predictive programming, if you were told that this person was saying Jew, you might hear it, but if you listened independently and listened well enough, it was obvious the guy was calling Trudeau a puke, which I think is being kind to Trudeau, and I think is being grossly unfair to Vomit, to compare Trudeau to Vomit. Trudeau's worse. Anyway, God bless. Sorry for the disjointed nature of tonight's video. Try and be a little more focused on Sunday. Hopefully something to talk about, narrowly fixated, beyond just a $3 to be misinformed. But it is what it is. Good night, Whale Oil Beef. Good night, Sharunian, Danny. Who am I missing? John 5. Everyone who showed up on the live tonight, thanks. I'll end it the way I always do. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord grant you peace. We'll see you Sunday night. Good night.